The cabin hummed with a quiet symphony of murmured conversations, the occasional rustling of luggage, and the soft chime of seatbelt signs. First-class passengers eased into their plush seats, where luxury was not just an offering but an expectation. Everything was smooth routine, until it wasn't. A flight attendant moved through the aisle with an air of practiced authority, her posture upright, her steps measured. But then she stopped, her gaze fixed on a young boy seated near the window, his small hands gripping the armrests, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the cabin lights. Her expression was unreadable, but her words cut through the ambient noise like a blade. "You need to move. This seat isn't for you." The boy blinked, confusion flickering across his face. His fingers tightened around the ticket in his grasp. He swallowed before speaking, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "But this is my seat." A long pause. The flight attendant's lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "I don't think so." Nearby passengers turned their heads, some exchanging hushed whispers, others choosing silence. Eyes flickered, judgments formed, but no one spoke up. No one questioned her words. But what she didn't know, what no one in that cabin knew, was that this boy was not just another passenger. And by the time this plane touched down, she would come to regret every assumption she had made that day. Welcome to Real Life Stories, where we bring you narratives that challenge perspectives, evoke reflection, and sometimes make you see the world a little differently. If you appreciate thought-provoking stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Now, let's return to the flight, because what happens next will change everything. The boy sat quietly, his back straight, his breath measured as he gazed out the window. The hum of the aircraft surrounded him, mingling with the low murmur of passengers settling into their seats. This was his first time flying alone, a reward from his father for excelling in school. It wasn't just about comfort or extravagance. It was about achievement, about what he had rightfully earned. And for a fleeting moment, everything felt perfect. Then came the voice. "Excuse me, young man." The same flight attendant loomed over him, her stance rigid, her face carefully neutral. Her name tag caught the soft lighting, reflecting a glimmer of authority. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Her tone wasn't yet hostile, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath the surface. The boy's chest tightened. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie, retrieving the neatly folded ticket. His fingers trembled slightly as he handed it to her. "Yes, ma'am, seat 3B. She barely glanced at it before shaking her head. "This is a first-class seat." "I know," he said, sitting up a little taller. Something flickered in her gaze, something unreadable, something unspoken. "Where are your parents?" she asked. His stomach clenched. "I'm traveling alone." A sigh, a shift in her expression. Her patience, already thin, was unraveling. "You see, there must have been a mistake," she said, her voice taking on a clipped, dismissive edge. "This section is reserved for first-class passengers only." And just like that, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. The unspoken meaning behind her words wrapped around his chest, tightening with every breath. A hush settled over the nearby seats. A few passengers turned away, others watched, but no one said a word. A hush settled over the surrounding rows, a tense quiet that stretched between the passengers like an unspoken agreement. Some glanced up, curiosity flickering in their eyes before they quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. Others watched intently, waiting to see how it would unfold. But no one spoke up. No one intervened. The boy's fingers curled tighter around the ticket, his pulse quickening as he repeated, more firmly this time, "But this is my seat." The flight attendant's tight-lipped smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile used to mask impatience, to conceal certainty that she was right. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said, her tone clipped but firm. "You need to gather your things and move to economy." Heat crept up his neck, a slow, suffocating burn. He wasn't being difficult. He wasn't causing trouble. He had proof, right there in his hands, that he belonged. But somehow none of it seemed to matter. The weight of silent judgment pressed down on him, filling every inch of the air around him. His ears burned. His breath felt unsteady. Every second that passed made it harder to fight back. Slowly, reluctantly, he reached for his backpack. His hands felt heavier than they should have, his legs unsteady as he forced himself to stand. The flight attendant didn't offer to help. She simply turned, motioning toward the back of the plane. "Right this way." The walk felt endless. Row after row of first-class passengers sat in silence, their gazes flickering toward him before quickly shifting away. Some lowered their eyes. Others fidgeted uncomfortably in their seats. But no one spoke. No one questioned it. No one stopped it. He sank into an empty seat in economy, the difference in space immediate. Everything felt smaller, tighter. The air itself seemed heavier, pressing against his chest. He exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. Then, with fingers still trembling, he pulled out his phone. "They made me move to the back." He hesitated before adding the rest. "I had my ticket." She didn't believe me. The reply came almost instantly. "What do you mean they made you move? Who made you move?" His father's words were short, sharp, not panicked, but razor-focused. The flight attendant. She said there was a mistake. She wouldn't listen. A long pause. Then, "What's the flight number?" His hands shook slightly as he typed it out, his heart hammering against his ribs. He hit send and stared at the screen, waiting. Another message arrived. "Stay where you are. I'll handle it." He exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He didn't know exactly what his father meant, but something about those words told him that this wasn't over. At the front of the plane, Miss Caldwell walked back to the galley, her posture relaxed, her expression almost smug. Another problem solved, another minor disruption neatly handled. Nicole, a younger flight attendant, hesitated as she placed a tray of glasses on the counter. She had seen everything. The sharpness in Miss Caldwell's voice, the way she hadn't even checked the system before deciding the boy was in the wrong seat. The assumption, the quiet, unquestioned certainty that he didn't belong. Nicole swallowed before speaking. "Was there a problem with his ticket?" she asked carefully. Miss Caldwell scoffed, adjusting the cuffs of her uniform. "Please. You saw him. Do you really think he paid for first class?" Something twisted in Nicole's stomach. She had worked plenty of flights. She had seen passengers of all backgrounds settle into first-class seats, some with ease, others with quiet, self-conscious pride. But there was something about the way Miss Caldwell said it, so dismissive, so sure, that made her uneasy. "But you didn't even check the system." Miss Caldwell waved a hand, brushing the concern aside as though it were nothing. "Trust me," she said with a knowing smirk. "I've been doing this a long time. I know when someone's in the wrong section." Nicole bit her tongue. She wanted to push back, to say something, anything, but she knew better. Miss Caldwell had been with the airline for over 20 years. She made the rules, whether they were written or not. Then, the intercom crackled. "Miss Caldwell, please report to the cockpit immediately." The air in the galley shifted. Flight attendants weren't usually called to the cockpit during service. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't normal. Something was wrong. Miss Caldwell stiffened, her confident air faltering for the first time. She adjusted her uniform, squared her shoulders, and made her way toward the front of the plane. When she stepped inside the cockpit, the atmosphere had changed. The captain, a seasoned pilot with graying hair and steady, no-nonsense eyes, turned to face her. He wasn't alone, and on the screen in front of him, everything she thought she knew was about to unravel. She moved through the cabin on unsteady legs, her polished demeanor now cracking under the weight of what had just happened. The boy was easy to spot. He sat by the window, his hands resting calmly on his lap, staring out at the endless sky. His face was unreadable. He wasn't crying. He wasn't making a scene. He was simply waiting. Miss Caldwell took a slow, uneven breath and crouched slightly beside his seat. "Sir," she said, her voice softer than before, "there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to escort you back to your original seat in first class." The boy blinked, tilting his head ever so slightly. "A misunderstanding?" She nodded quickly, eager to end this moment as soon as possible. Yes, there was an error in seating. He studied her, his voice as steady as his gaze. But I had my ticket. You saw it. And you still told me to move. A murmur rippled through the surrounding passengers. They had heard everything earlier. They knew he was right. Miss Caldwell's mouth went dry. I may have made a mistake in judgment, she admitted, forcing the words out as her face burned with embarrassment. But I'd like to correct it now. Please, come with me. The boy didn't move right away. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply watched her. His silence stretched longer than she was comfortable with. Then, without a word, he reached for his phone. A moment later, Miss Caldwell's work tablet vibrated in her pocket. She hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled it out. A message flashed across the screen, forwarded from the airline's executive office. Take your time. Make her understand what she did. Her heart pounded. The boy met her gaze. I'll go back, he said, voice even, controlled. But I want to know why you thought I didn't belong here. The cabin held its breath. Passengers exchanged glances. Some looked at Miss Caldwell, others at the boy. She swallowed hard. Heat crawled up her neck. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control, and she had no idea how to fix it. The rest of the flight passed in a thick, unbearable silence. The plane hummed as it began its descent. But inside Miss Caldwell's mind there was only noise. For years, she had believed she set the rules, that she was the authority, that her judgment was final. But today, she had learned what it felt like to be judged. She stole a glance toward first class. The boy sat there now, where he had always belonged, flipping through the in-flight magazine with quiet ease. No anger, no arrogance, just calm, unwavering confidence. And somehow, that made it worse. Because he wasn't the one who should be nervous. She was. The landing was smooth, but for Miss Caldwell, it felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her feet. As passengers gathered their belongings, the intercom crackled one final time. Miss Caldwell, please remain on board. Her stomach dropped. The weight of what was coming next settled on her shoulders, heavy and inescapable. The final realization. Her stomach twisted into knots. She had known this moment was coming, had braced herself for it, but hearing those words aloud made it real in a way she wasn't prepared for. One by one, the passengers filed out of the plane. Some cast quick, knowing glances in her direction. Others passed without a word, their silence speaking louder than any accusation ever could. Then, the boy stood. He adjusted the sleeves of his hoodie, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and stepped into the aisle. But before he walked away, he turned to her, really looked at her for the first time. She opened her mouth. Maybe to apologize, maybe to explain, maybe to grasp at some last shred of control. But no words came. Before she could say anything, he simply gave a small nod. Not in forgiveness, not in anger, just an acknowledgement of what had happened. Then, without another word, he turned and walked off the plane. A beat later, the door fully opened. A uniformed security officer stepped inside. Come with me. Her legs felt like lead as she forced herself to move. The moment she stepped into the jet bridge, the sterile airport lights felt harsh, almost blinding. Every step forward was heavier than the last. For years she had walked through these halls with confidence, always in control, always the one making the calls. But today, she wasn't just walking. She was being watched. And for the first time, she truly understood why. This wasn't just about a mistake. It was about an assumption, a quick, thoughtless judgment that had stripped someone of their dignity in an instant. And no matter what happened next, no matter how many years she had given to this job, she knew one thing with certainty. She would never forget this moment. Because moments like these leave a mark, a lesson, a reminder that how we treat others, especially when we think no one is watching, matters. If this story made you think, let us know in the comments. What would you have done if you were on that flight? Hit the like button, share this video, and let's get Real Life Stories new to 1 million subscribers. Because every story has a lesson, and we're here to tell them. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.